Chaps, without looking, I believe 12th of July, and good afternoon, was a Friday, but that doesn't mean anything when you're the German Luftwaffe, or the Royal Air Force in 1914. As I said, I was going to sort of do this, might as well do a Twitter account like that chap did. Is it last year for the 80th anniversary of the start of World War II, and they did daily updates. Before I carry on, can you imagine what the world would have been? Well, how the war would have been if you had all this technology and media today, like media technology anyway. Hitler would be on Twitter constantly, probably. Well, Goebbels would have been anyway. As it is, and as it was, the Luftwaffe are mostly concentrating their attacks to convoys anywhere they can find them. For instance, today, on the 12th of July, they attacked one off Suffolk, which is in if you're not from Britain, a place called East Anglia. It's that bumpy, sort of next to, round about that bumpy bit on the east coast, towards the Channel. They also attacked Aberdeen today, or at least bombed a shipyard, killing a few people there. And the other day, they attacked the docks. Not winning with my glasses. They also attacked the docks of Portsmouth a couple of days ago. And the thing is, as I said, the Luftwaffe is largely concentrating their attacks to convoys and any other target of opportunity in a way. And the RAF, I think, is still, in a way, finding their feet. Even though the convoys have been under attack almost for the past few weeks. The RAF, I think, in places anyway, Fighter Command, are still sort of reeling from being kicked out of France, but also the losses incurred. They've lost a few pilots, to put it mildly, in the Battle of France. They've lost some over Dunkirk, and it takes a while to train pilots, even if you cut corners. And at the height of the battle, in just over a month's time, these pilots didn't have enough time that were coming into the battle really to learn. They had to learn on the job really, and I think they said new pilots at the height of the battle probably had something like 4 or 5 days life expectancy. Veterans. And you only had to be, you could have been in the battle from the off, or from Dunkirk, or the Battle of France, like one of the last pilots to die earlier this year was. You don't have time to remember their names. You don't want to remember their names, because they could be dead the afternoon they turn up. I mean, I think there were cases of newbies, as we'd call them at M&S, showing up in the morning, you know, how many hours have you had on Spitz, or whatever, and they'll be dead in a couple of hours' time. But the RAF are losing pilots in this Canal Kampf phase of the Battle of Britain, because obviously they're going up to meet them. The first casualty of the Battle of Britain was rammed into a Dornier, or the Dornier rammed him. Some have been lost today to enemy to bomber return fire. And I read somewhere once, and I don't know where I read it, otherwise I'd reference it more accurately. At the height, if you were shot down and lifted tail to tail by a bomber, your flight mates would make absolute mockery of you, because you've been shot down by a bomber essentially. RAF pilots, as indeed anyone did during the war and in any conflict really, have a fairly dry sense of humour, or a sense of humour that doesn't translate to civilians and those in peacetime. This generation, for all their mobile phone obsession, social media, TikTok and any other kind of rock, they've not had to know trouble. I've not, my generation hasn't, my parents' generation hasn't. If a pilot crashed into a mountain or a hill in low cloud, it was seen as flying into a cloud with a hard centre. There's one reason why I say you should read the novel Piece of Cake, because it does an accurate job. It got a lot of flack when it came out in the 70s, I think it was, for its depiction. But like I said, I've read enough books about the Battle of Britain to know, even partially, that it's how they were, some of them anyway, and some were utter shits, like Derek Robinson writes with the infamous character Moggy Catamol. And there's a Sunderland, is he still at Sunderland? I don't know, there's a footballer called Catamar, and I always call him Moggy because of the novel, but I wouldn't say it to his face. Not wearing a Portsmouth shirt anyway. But in seriousness, it's almost like the invasion of Russia a year later, in the sense that even in victory, the Germans are losing more material and men than the enemy. I mean, the Russians would be defeated in a few battles in 1941 42, and yet the Germans invariably started to lose more men, even winning a battle, than the Russians did. And that day-to-day webpage, the Battle Britain Memorial, which I'll link hopefully in the description, the British have lost pilots and aircraft daily since the 10th, and it feels a lot longer than 2 days or whatever, but the British have lost, I think by now, I'm going to put the stats at the end of this video. I've lost about 10 aircraft, not even that, and a similar number of men. And it's not just Spitfires and Hurricanes, of course. There's Defiants involved, and they eventually had to be pulled out of the front line because they were mincemeat for enemy fighters. But the Germans, because I guess they're flying bombers with multiple crew on board, have lost almost 40-50 aircraft with a similar, with more double that in terms of manpower. It's insane. And of course the battle drags on. And as much as we should rightly focus, and I always do every year around about September, on the RAF chaps, British, Poles, Czechs, French, Dutch, Belgians, from all over the continent of Africa, the Caribbean, Canada, Australasia, wherever they came from. I think it's interesting to look at it from the German viewpoint, at least the men that were flying. Because it's now emerging, or it has emerged in the past couple of years, that one way that the bomber crews were getting through it was crystal meth. They were up to, they were stoned or whatever it is. I can tell I don't do drugs, apart from alcohol. And as I said in the previous video, unlike the British, if they bailed out over Britain, that's it. Their war is over. Whereas a pilot, if he's not hurt himself in Britain, Spitfire or otherwise, can bail out, get back to his base hopefully in a couple of hours, or if he's near the base or whatever, he has the option of that, and he's back in action the same day or the next day with a new aircraft. The Germans, they crash out. That's it for you. The war is over, Fritz. And some of them that were bailing out in July and August, before I guess they realised the British weren't being pushed over anytime soon, were unbearably cocky. Apparently, some of them, like I read that one pilot or one Luftwaffe crewman insisted that one of his captors went to the local shop to get him a certain brand of cigarettes, treated him like he was already ruling the place. Another said, your cockiness will go soon. The Fuhrer will conquer Britain soon enough. And let's be honest, if you were a German at this time, or at least say you were in the Luftwaffe and the army on the shore, you must feel quite full of yourself, or at least self-confident. Even if you know Nazi, that Hitler has managed to deliver incredibly well and seemingly unopposed. The Rhineland, of course, went with no quibble in 36, and that was Hitler's biggest gamble at the time in a way, because Germany was sure as hell far not in any shape or form to fight a minor skirmish, let alone a war. Then, of course, Austria. That was brave. And then, of course, Czechoslovakia. That, if anything, should have sparked a war, because Britain and France, made a promise, and we welched on it. But then there's complications, isn't there? And then Poland was wiped out in the space of a couple of weeks, and that was a proper war, so that was a proper operation, so to speak. And France fell within a space of a few weeks, really, even though the armistice was over a month from that. You'd driven the British Expeditionary Force from France. Norway's gone. You all now this mighty swathe of land. So, I mean, a Luftwaffe pilot, say, getting into his bomber on July 10th, must be feeling pretty chuffed. And, the Channel Islands are gone. I know they're not, unfortunately, important enough to either side, although Hitler got obsessed with them. they were sort of seen in their way as the prelude to what was going to happen in Britain, Operation Sea Lion. So, you know, July 12th is all gearing into action. But even though their focus is on military targets like Portsmouth, when they bombed Portsmouth, they managed to hit the city as well. Whether it's on purpose or not is probably 50-50, because I think Hitler certainly didn't want London touched, because he still had hopes and stuff. But Portsmouth, even if you're remotely familiar with Portsmouth or not, if you look on it on a map, it's on what they call Portsea Island, and apparently Portsmouth is the largest island city in Britain or something. And the harbour is obviously to the left, and it's sort of bracketed by Portsmouth and Gosport. And the dockyard is up the Portsmouth shoreline, sort of like to the top, to the little bit of a top, which nowadays is not too far from the ferry port. And there's homes right up against the dockyard wall, really, on the road, on not commercial road, that goes up into the city centre, and it sort of goes around the top as well. If you look on a map, Google Maps is a little easier, but they killed about 19 people when they bombed Portsmouth. I'm sure I read somewhere, and it was in a book. And you think, well, obviously, but like a proper war book, not like a local Portsmouth history book, that until the Blitz started on London, Portsmouth was the most bombed place in the United Kingdom. And it's the home of the Royal Navy. Whether people like Pompey or not, it was still, as now, the home of the Royal Navy. And then, until the 60s, that was where we built a lot of ships. It wasn't the sole base in Britain that we built ships in, or indeed in the world, because I think we built them at Hong Kong and I think maybe Gibraltar and other places. But either way, you're going to hit civilian targets by accident. It's the nature of war. I would say, like in Iraq in 2003, when the B-52s were plastering Baghdad whilst I was having my dinner. Such a peculiar world we live in. So there it is, chaps. Flights of fancy in a way. It was only meant to be a short video, but where are we? July 12th. Yeah, I'll try and put the stats as I say at the end, and then go from there. And the descriptions. So thanks awfully, chaps.